Okay, thank you, Dima and Melissa. Very good event, and this is our first time PyCon Indonesia with online, and I am in my room. Yeah, it's not like a conference, but I see the chat is uh, very interesting. So many people talk about this event, and yeah, say hi with everyone there. So. This is our first keynote speaker in PyCon Indonesia 2020. We have three keynote speaker, and today we have Mas Ariya Hidayat. And please welcome Mas Ariya Hidayat. Say hello, please, everyone. Hello, Mas Ariya.
Hello, everyone. Glad to be here.
Okay, how are you now?
I'm good. How about you?
Nice. And yeah, I hear about you live in US. And what time is now?
Right now is 7 p.m., 7 in the evening.
Okay, so our theme about the connect, we are so far away, and yeah, we connect here. uh, I want to read about your short profile. Mas Ariya Hidayat is a person who live and breathe with open source, and now talking about making a bigger impact with open source. Currently, he is the co-founder of Hyperjump with its slogan, Maju Bersama Teknologi Open Source. In the past, he created several world-class open source projects, such as Phantom.js and Esprima, involve and contribute with various FOSS community, such as WebKit, KDE, and Qt. And this is mostly I interested. In the past, Mas Arya studied physics engineering in ITB. Wow, and obtained doctoral degree in electrical engineering in University of Paderborn, German. I searched in Google Scholar about your research paper. There are several about fiber optic communication system, and you said it have 30, more than 30. So this is the answer for participant and everyone for you. They're asking, saya nggak kuliah IT nih, bisa nggak sih jadi programmer? Yeah, that's the answer. And actually, I'm not a graduate from IT too. And for you that currently study in IT, yeah, don't be slack off because you will lost with other people. And now, as Ariya is focusing on making social impact with technology, write a blog post, speak at developer event, and I see Mas Arya have a podcast. That's right?
That's right.
Oh, nice. If you want to know about more about Mas Arya, please come to pycon.id. We have a dedicated profile for Mas Arya. And if you want to ask some question, like Dima said, your question will appear like this, and please ask whatever you want to ask in with Mas Arya. So, Mas Arya, I will give you a stage and time.
All right. Thank you, Tegar. Thank you, PyCon ID, for inviting me. I'm so honored to open the first day keynote with something that is dear to my heart, that is open source. I like to share a few experiences that I've gone through doing and being involved with various open source community in the last 2 decades. Now, before I start, I think let's do a story time first. Since I live abroad, and I always need to introduce to some friends that I originally came from Indonesia, but I live in California for 10 years. At some point, it always occurred to my mind, what is unique about Indonesia so that people know about it and remember about it? I've gone through a lot of thought process and realized that, there's bad things, there's good things about Indonesia, but let's try to pick something that is very memorable. If we just talk about, let's say, tourism, a lot of people knows about Bali, but to be honest, there's still many other tourist destinations besides just Bali. So I don't want to make it as if Indonesia is only about Bali. And if you talk about sport, unfortunately, we're not really better there. Maybe badminton or even archery, but if it's about soccer and basketball and other popular sport, unfortunately, our national team barely had any presence in international stage. Now, one time it dawned on me, maybe this is about food, because we have a fantastic culinary offering. We can talk about sate, rendang, bakso, pecel, gado-gado, dodol, all kind of meals and snacks and everything else that comes with it. Fortunately or unfortunately, depending on your perspective, after I chat with a lot of people from all over the places, apparently there's one type of food that makes Indonesia extremely famous, and there's no dispute that we're the champion here. And I'm not talking about sate or rendang or anything else. Turn out that if you want everyone to remember what Indonesia is, you just have to mention ramen noodles, or as we call it, instant noodles. Amazingly, everyone, whether they're in Africa, in other part of Asia, in United States, in Europe, they all kind of agree that Indonesian noodles is one of the best, if not the best. In fact, some doctors in Africa needs to promise the kids a bowl of noodles so they get their vaccination. Otherwise, the kids won't bother. Forget about unboxing gadgets. This day, you can find videos on YouTube about unboxing noodles from Indonesia. I think this is fortunate or unfortunate, depending on your point of view. Now, if we take a step back, and I'm sure some of you might wonder, what's the relation between this and open source? But let's take a look at what happens a year ago. Something important happens. IBM acquired Red Hat, and the acquisition value at that time is stunning. It's massive. It's $34 billion. Now, in the world of startups, everyone who works for startups might already realize that there's a specific lingo that we use to describe billions, and that is a unicorn. In other words, the amount of money that IBM needs to pay Red Hat so that IBM can get all the Red Hat line of business is equivalent to 34 unicorns. I mean, think about it. We don't even have 34 unicorns in Indonesia and even Southeast Asia. And yet, the value of Red Hat, the business of open source Linux, is worth so much that IBM needs to pay that amount of money. This is massive because if you think about it, many people always complain or sometimes get the misunderstanding that, open source, there's no money, there's no commercial aspect. This just proves that all that kind of perception is completely wrong. And with a friend of mine, we calculate, right, how much is actually 34 billion US dollar, because this is such a lot of money that sometimes it's hard to comprehend for us. We realized that if IBM uses this money, 34 billions, to buy the entire assets of the largest instant noodle manufacturers, Indofood, it is enough actually to buy 5 Indofoods, and IBM even got some change. That's just illustrate that this business open source is actually really big. There's no more dispute about it. There shouldn't be any hesitation that open source is the future, both from the financial perspective and from the technology perspective. And therefore, next time if you work on open source, if you're passionate about open source, and someone complains to you, why open source? Why not doing something a bit more fancy and commercials? And maybe your friend is doing that while eating some noodles. Then you can point out that fact that the value of Red Hat is bigger than 5 Indofoods combined. So before we go into a bit more in depth regarding the benefit that you get if you become the active contributor to an open source project, Python or any other projects, let's take a look, for instance, what is the relationship between companies and open source these days? So there are 4 categories here. The first one is companies or organization or any kind of teams that is really, really against open source. In reality, for practical and financial reason, this might not happen anymore. And the reason is very simple. If you want to build something these days and you want to build everything from scratch yourself, it's going to take ages. And by that time, your competitor will be already far ahead. So there's no point. I think those that who might still have the anti-open source sentiment, they live in the past. They're probably still fighting the mammoth and other wild animal, maybe even dinosaurs. It's dead. It's already proven. If you want to build modern apps this day, if you want to build companies, there's no way to escape open source. In fact, if you're still against open source, I'm sure one day there will be some episode about this typical TV series. If, as an engineer, you are very against open source when you want to build your business. Now, the next category will be companies that, well, use open source. And this is almost the de facto these days. You want to build a business, whether it's a digital business or not, well, we're bound to use open source project. And this is hardly a surprise, right? If you pick any kind of business that you want to build and you want to think about how do I build the back end, how do I build the front end, how do I combine things, how do I deploy things, how am I going to store the repository, and so on and so forth, you have no way to escape all this wealth choices of open source. You can choose between different web frameworks. You can choose between different front-end frameworks, deployment system, orchestration, and so on and so forth. This is truly the luxury that we have, because 20 years ago, you don't have that luxury. You have to really implement everything from scratch or from bits and pieces. These days, you just need to focus on your core competence. You just need to build your business. You don't need to worry anymore about the technology, because the technology is there. You just need to master it. Now, so notionally and logically,
Okay, you are back, and let's continue.
Therefore, if you want to build a business, you want to build a front end and back end and so on and so forth, it is important to start faster, and therefore you're just going to pick the open source choices and tools and services available to you. Now, the next level will be companies that do not only use open source or become the champion for open source, but also support all those open source projects. Actually, this is not new to us, because in our culture, inherited from our ancestor, we know these things called gotong royong. If our neighbors, our friends, or families have some difficulties, then we do not hesitate to pitch in or chime in and get together to help them, because that's very important. That's part of our culture. Unfortunately, although this is, technically speaking, our culture, we kind of lost it. We have forgotten it. When it becomes open source, then everyone realized that, oh, right, yeah, open source is cool, but actually we've done this before. We just need to continue to live the values. Then we know that supporting open source, supporting activities, supporting communities is actually part of who we are, if we pay attention to that. In other words, open source should be nothing new to us. We should embrace it, because this is just so natural to us, right? We just don't do that to, let's say, technologies. Now, the next level, this is actually what is very important. Plopper, or in English, we can call it as Innovator, or championing open source project. I'm going to pick a couple of examples. For instance, everyone that plays with machine learning obviously might be already familiar with TensorFlow and PyTorch, and these are the projects from Google and Facebook. In the space of deployment, Ansible is extremely famous. I also like, for instance, Airflow for Airbnb for workflow management. These are all the open source projects that came about from those companies as their research project and part of their product, obviously. Now, the reason they made it available as open source project is not to directly supporting their business, man. Just because Google released TensorFlow, it doesn't mean that Google gets more money from their ads business. Just because Facebook has PyTorch as a project, it doesn't mean that it's going to support advertising business of Facebook. Same thing with Red Hat and Airbnb and a few other examples, right? I'm using Airflow, but I don't necessarily use Airbnb business. These companies support or pioneering or champion the use of open source and they release it for the benefit of everyone. It's not because they want their business to be supported by all this project. Now, this is the first category. There's also a second category of companies that open source their product, but they still get the benefit from the business or the commercial aspect of it. We've seen Red Hat, the one that I mentioned before, GitLab, Nginx, Redis, Elasticsearch, Mongo. Many companies actually release the majority of portion of their products as open source projects that you can use on a day-to-day basis. In the meantime, they thrive as a company. They're getting bigger as a company, even if the majority of the product is open source. Why is that possible? This is possible because there's a new generation of companies that performs or offer services or manage services. This is often called SaaS. SaaS is the third level in the cloud services. There's an infrastructure as a service, there's a platform as a service, and there's a software as a service. In other words, in the business of SaaS, what you buy is the operational aspect of running the service, not the software itself. You don't go to a SaaS company and buy the CD or the DVD or the software box. No, you buy the service. Now, this is not super new to us, again, because I'm sure if you start a company, most people use G Suite or Office or Fastmail or any kind of other managed email solutions. Very rarely someone start up a server and install an email server, SMTP, IMAP, and POP3, and then use that as an email, and then maybe install some calendar solution and so on and so forth. Not only it is tedious, it is not part of your core business. If you want to build a business around agriculture or education or e-commerce or financial, doing emails have nothing to do with your business, and therefore you want to delegate it to the expert, in this case, Gmail or Office and so on. Now, is there anything secret regarding the way Gmail or Office Outlook send email? No. They use the same email server that you could also download from the internet and install yourself. Therefore, what they sell is not the email software. What they sell is the email service and calendar and document and many others. You don't pay for the software, you pay for the service. And this is very important. Again, the concept of SaaS is actually nothing new to us. We bought fried rice or nasi goreng, and if we have flat tire, we go to tukang tambal ban. So there's nothing magical or secret about the way they cook or the way they fill your tire with air. It's just air and a machine. It doesn't require an extraordinary skills, and there's no secret recipe behind this. You could do this yourself. In fact, almost everyone, if you have the motivation, you could learn how to cook fried rice yourself. Yet you go somewhere and buy it. Maybe you're pressed with time. Maybe you want to do something else. You don't want to get busy preparing the food, and therefore you just want to buy it. This is important because, again, what they sell is not the secret. What they sell as street vendors, food vendors here, is the ability to consume the food so that you don't need to worry about preparing it and making it. But there's no secret about that. Okay, so with SaaS, it's possible for Elastic, Redis, and GitLab and a few others to offer managed service of their product. At the same time, if you want to download it, you can also do that. Obviously, sometimes there's difference between the community edition and the premium enterprise editions, but that's part of the offering. That's part of how they make money. So the business model relies on a couple of things. It could be from support. Yeah, if you're a 3% startup, you might want to run Redis yourself. But if you're big companies, if you're a multinational company and you have a lot of business, you probably don't want to run Redis yourself. You want to call up Redis and say, hey, we want you to run Redis for us. Here's how we're going to pay for support. Or integration with various systems that you have. Or even modification so that it can fit your workflow. It can fit into the existing other software that you have in-house and so on. That's important. Now, this is what makes commercialized open source possible, because as a SaaS business, the key is not selling the software. The key is selling the service. This is why there's a wealth of commercial open source projects that have been born in the last few years. I think everyone that builds products might be familiar with or even be using it already. Everything that I mentioned before, right? Redis, Mongo, Elasticsearch, all the product from HashiCorp, Sentry, and a few others. Now that it's clear how companies build a business around open source, I want to take some time to emphasize what will be the benefit if we as an individuals embrace open source, not only from the perspective of using it and consuming it, but also as an active participant. Okay. The first thing is that because we will, if you study open source in depth, you're gonna go beyond any kind of superficial understanding. We've known this very well, that in any discussion, whether it's an online discussion, a forum discussion, or even in the office, there's always a situation where someone is just going to give up because they face a problem and they just don't know how to solve it. Very little troubleshooting skills, very little understanding on how to debug things. This is the root cause of this is because of the superficial understanding. And this is very dangerous because it's hard to become an expert if all you need to do is just play with some samples code from Stack Overflow, and if it doesn't work, then you don't know what to do anymore. It's very, very hard. Now, if you start to get involved actively in many open source projects and many open source community, this problem will go away because you don't. You need to learn really deep. You cannot just learn at the superficial level. Remember when you were in college or university and you study some subject, so you just need to pass an exam. That's the feeling that you get if you just use some product. You use it to get your job done. That's it. You don't care anymore. This is also what permeates in our culture. Someone can look smart by stringing together a bunch of buzzwords, right? Oh, this is IoT using maybe blockchain combined with Industrial Revolution 4.0 that leads to some digital transformation. All those buzzwords are meaningless because it's just at the superficial level. When you take a project and you try to analyze it and understand it much better, it's gonna stay better in your mind, in your memory. This is the same thing, right? Why people discuss useless celebrity gossips easily? Because you consume a useless story and share it and discuss it with your friends, and therefore that's what you remember. But any other important things that you just read for a few seconds, you will never remember that because you don't take any steps to actually acquire the knowledge. You just want to be done with it, and that's the problem. So we should get rid of the problem by not only reading something, but try to explain it, try to tell it again with our own words. Or if you have a project, don't just use it, tweak it, play with it, break it apart, reassembling it again, or in other words, just tinker with it. At some point, you're going to gain a much better in-depth understanding. And that way, at some point, you'll become an expert and will not just give up upon the very first problem that you encounter. Second thing is, when you start to engage very actively in an open source project or open source community, you're going to learn really fast. Not every one of us, for instance, have the luxury to be able to go to Google or Microsoft or other big companies that you admire and work alongside their engineers, their breadth engineers. But guess what? If you start to contribute to TensorFlow, you get to know Google engineers. If you start to work with PyTorch, you get to know Facebook engineers. This is an opportunity because you can absorb the way they learn, the way they work, the way they code by being in the community without going through the painful process of actually working for the company. And this is fantastic because this is how the virtual work works. You don't need to be in the same room, in the same office to be able to learn from each other. We have this wisdom that you are the average of the 5 people you hang out with. So if all your roommates are lazy, it's very hard to imagine that you won't become lazy. I think just the nature of it. But if you pick a project and hang out with the community, hang out with everyone that knows how to code very well, how to articulate very well, how to write very well, yes, in the beginning, you probably just observe it. But at some point, you're going to get some of that skills and try to use it yourself. This is the point. Pick your friends carefully. Hang out with the people that should become your role model. And the best way to do that is to pick a community that you like and be there. The third benefit that I want to highlight is this implicit leverage of quality. We know this, right? When you just stay at home, you probably don't care on how you dress. But when you want to hang out with your friends somewhere, going to a mall, going to a cafe, naturally you always dress up. And this is especially true if you're single, for instance. I think everyone who's single right now can relate to that very easily. Why? Because at home you don't care, but when you're out there in the public, you start to care a little bit. You want to make sure that people don't get an incorrect impression of yourself. Now, same thing. When you do something in the open, the scrutiny is important to pay attention to. The aspect of being in the open suddenly forces you to pause and think, oh, I shouldn't just write this code very carefully. I need to pay attention to the code style. I need to pay attention to the linter and everything else that relates to quality. You just think twice. You don't rush. You don't hurry, because you know that somebody might be able to observe what you're doing, maybe even years in the future. I have the feeling that one day someone is gonna like some guy is gonna like a girl, and he wants to marry her, and he goes to the parents of the girls, and suddenly the future in-laws told him that no, the deal is off, because I found your pull request in GitHub 10 years ago, and you didn't pay attention to, you didn't run Pylin or Flakes, you didn't have any unit tests, and so on and so forth. You were careless, and therefore I will not let you marry my daughter. Who knows, it might happen. This is very important, because I think everyone in the world at some point will have a GitHub account. So whatever you put out there, you have to pay attention to the quality. And just by doing that, it's going to increase the way you think and the way you code. In fact, the other benefit will be not only you care about the project that is public out there, but you start to care about even private or non-public project, because it starts to become a habit. If I start a project, I have to prepare some continuous integration, I have to put some unit tests, I need to run the linter, and so on and so forth. If it becomes a habit, then you automatically do that, even for just playground project or sandbox projects that nobody is going to see. Oh, it's only for myself. It doesn't really matter. It's a habit to you already. So you just do that automatically. It becomes muscle memory. And of course, having good quality contribution out there, they become your portfolio. Someday, some future employer might take a look at you and realize that, oh yeah, this guy or this gal contributes to this project, and look, the code quality is fantastic. They pay attention to every single details and so on and so forth. This is fantastic. Then this is more beautiful than just interview, because any kind of tech interview, it's unfair to decide someone's future just by 30 minutes of assessment or coding exercise. Right? But if you have a wealth of history producing high quality open source project, or participate in a community in a positive way for years and years, that's an insane amount of data points for your future employer to decide that, oh yeah, actually, this engineer, this product manager, this technical person is fantastic. So it's very important. Those two are the three benefits. You're going to learn really deep, you learn fast, and of course, it's going to improve your quality. But nevertheless, it's important to make sure that the experience is rewarding. So every journey start with a small step. Don't try to be ambitious. If you're an engineer right now, before you know how to code, you still need to learn how to read and write. And when you're a baby, you can even speak. So it's important to pay attention to this baby step. Make sure that the experience is rewarding, is positive. It encourages you to move to the next step. In other words, start small. Don't start big. Pick something that is simple. In fact, the easiest way to start being involved in a project and community, and I'm sure Marietta, the keynote speaker for the second day, will elaborate on this point further, is to start with something that might have nothing to do with the code itself. For instance, with some docs, maybe correct some typos, prepare some translation to Bahasa Indonesia or whatever language that you know, or participate in a discussion, be active in the forum, answer questions, right, or report some bugs, or even create test cases for the bugs, or create a repro for the bugs, trying to triage the issues, and so on and so forth. This is a lot of things that you can do without an in-depth understanding of the code itself, but that's build a consciousness around the project and try to understand the way it works. This is some of the underappreciated aspect of unit tests. For instance, if I want to know how to contribute to a project, the first thing that I check is obviously documentation, but not every project have a great documentation. Sometimes, if the project doesn't have a great documentation, you can just take a look at the unit test and see that, oh yeah, this is the function, it's being called this way, this is the output. So the unit test serves as a contract, as an expectation. And just by following that, you know, this is how I use the project. This is how this library or framework. So do not underestimate the power of that. And by contributing to that test, or by understanding the test and improve it, you will make it easier for the next person who wants to learn the project, right? This is a compound effect. Right? If every one of us contribute a little bit, just like a potluck party, the total amount of activity and usefulness is just multiplies. So this is important. Start small. And we have to make sure that we encourage and influence our employer so that they think that open source is an important aspect of the activity. If you are allowed to learn something from the open source project and you work for a company and you're an engineer in that company, you become better. And by that proxy, the company becomes better too, right? It is unimaginable that a company wants to employ a lot of people that is not smart. That's not usually the goal of any company, right? Every startup always pitch that we have the best engineer here. And if that is the pitch, then those engineers should have the opportunity to learn. And one of the easiest learning method is by being involved actively in the community. So I want to close this with an emphasis that all tech companies are built using open source stack. They stand on the shoulder of the giants, the open source giants. So it's imperative that they contribute back to the community. It's imperative for us to influence, to remind them, to encourage them to do that. Right? There's no point of building 1 million startups or 1,000 unicorns if that doesn't make everyone better, if that doesn't improve the developer community. It's just selfish then. We need more superheroes, and not all superheroes wear caps. If we want to secure the bright future of our country, we have to do this together. We can't just passively using and consuming products. Please, please, please build something, contribute to an existing project, share it with the world, and help each other. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Mas Ariya, for the presentation. It's very encouraging, and we have so many questions here. I confused how to choose it. So let's start with the first one from Sigit Dewanto. It's a classic question, I think. Why you don't make a company based on Phantom.js? We know that Phantom.js is one of the most popular UK.
For the reason, there are two reasons. One is that it was just a hobby back then, and therefore I view it as a fun activity, just like any other hobbies. If you make it your responsibility, then it stops being a hobby. It stops being fun, and that's what I'm afraid what's going to happen if I turn that into a commercial ventures. The second one will be that at that time I know nothing about running business. So yes, even if I could have done this, I'm sure the company will fail.
Okay, so we must know about the knowledge how to build the company before uh, create the open source project to the business like
Of
that.
course.
Okay, so go to the second question. It's from Chitra. How can you manage your time it will contribute to some open source? Yeah, sometimes it's not our daily life.
Two approach. One is that you treat it as an investment because you learn something. Just like other investment that you think, why do you need to go to college as opposed to you want to work directly, or because I want to invest in gaining the knowledge so that I can get a better job, for instance. Right? That's the same thing. If you want to do active open source contributing on the side, on the spare time, yes, treat that as an investment. Obviously, it's going to compete with the other activities and their priorities, and therefore be careful with that. However, the best thing that can happen to you is that if your employer or your boss or managers allows you to use portion of your work time to learn something or to contribute to open source. And I think this is, for me personally, I think this is the only sane way because contributing to open source on the weekends or spare times is not necessarily sustainable, right? But if you do it part of your work, then it's
that's the dream company, I think.
it doesn't need to be 100% of the time, but if you can just officially sanction that yes, I can learn something by contributing to open source, and it counts as part of my working hours, that's fantastic. And if you work for a company that doesn't allow that, make sure you spend some time to search for a better job at some point.
Okay, so I wrap up. How to manage? Let's think about contribute is investing like that.
Exactly.
Okay.
A learning opportunity.
Learning opportunity. And I think it's the third question is Faisal, how about company take profit from open source but not contribute back? It's maybe discourage us to contribute or to create open source project. What do you think?
This is the so-called the freeloaders, and we always forever have freeloaders in this world. Right? There's two ways to look at it, right? One is you could think of those companies as free QA for your project, if this is your project. It's good that someone is using it. Then hopefully, if they discover a problem, they're going to report to you. So in other words, someone is using your project. Good. Hopefully, they benefit from it. If not, okay. If they benefit and they found a problem, at least we get the reports. The other way to look at it is that, well, then vote with your money or vote with your confidence. Don't try to do any business with this kind of company, because by supporting them, you're just encouraging that behavior. In other words, if I want to spend my my hard-earned money on picking two product from two different companies, I think I'll tend to gravitate towards some companies that has a bit more social responsibility from the way they benefit from the open source community.
Okay, nice. Yeah, we know maybe some. Yeah, I think some of us also only use it without contributing back. So we are not talking about other big company, but we also like that, I think. Yeah, just do what you can do. I think like that. And Felicia, what shall we do if we want to make an open source project? So we talk about contributing project. Now she asks about if she want to make an open source project, and what thing we are need and prepare before making it.
So usually it's a long list. There's a good project. There's a good book about that open source architecture. But really, the easiest way is if you learn how it's done by contributing to an existing project, because then you just kind of copy the way the project is done. So A lot of rookies' mistake from first-time contributors is to start their own project. This is usually challenging. It's better to go somewhere, like doing internship. Right? Let me just go to some of the project, learn how they do things, and then copy it for my own benefit. That's usually way easier than trying to figure out everything yourself and learn from all the mistakes. So I highly encourage you to contribute to projects that you're already using. So it's not some random projects. See how they're doing things, see how they discuss, doing code review, using linter, writing tests, docs, and so on. Once you gain enough understanding, that serves as a basis if you want to start a new project from scratch.
Okay, so before you create, learn how to contribute first. After that,
baby
create it.
step, yeah.
Yeah, and this is, I think, have a relation with question before from Yahya. Okay, we already have good tools that have a big impact, but how to promote it? Because not everyone have a strong network.
At the end of the day, the project that you build or the project that you contribute to needs to address a real problem. So if the problem doesn't exist, obviously your solution will not become popular. Or if the problem is only maybe applies to a small group of people. In other words, the ultimate goal of building and making open source project is not for popularity contests. The goal is not to get as many users as possible. Those are useless metrics. Those are useful in the business world because you want to get profit and so on and so forth, right? But in the context of making something useful and sharing it with the world, the metric is not the number of people affected by that, right? If you have one user, one other people benefiting from your project, it's already very good.
Okay, so if only one use it and impacted, is very good. I think the follow-up question from me, some of author of open source project sometimes send the link to Reddit or other channel. Do you have any preferred channel to share your project?
These days, I think people just go to GitHub and see the list of projects there. GitHub is a README repository right now. So if you go to anyone's GitHub account, they can write the README file, README markdown that lists all the different projects.
Okay, nice. Okay, so we talk about the global in open source project, and Mas Eka asks about chance of contributing open source while making living in Indonesia.
I'm not sure I understand questions, but I think if there are two ways to look at this, right? One is as a volunteer. Obviously, it's always possible. Maybe even better because if some projects are mainly centered in Europe and the US, then during that time zone, it's not working hours in Indonesia, so you can do that. So as volunteers, it should be possible. I think there's also a challenge with the time zone, but these days communication happens asynchronously through, Slack or Discord and emails. Therefore, face-to-face meeting is not a necessity for open source project or running open source project. But the second aspect is if you want to be paid as an open source developer for open source project, that's also possible. I think there's start to see a lot of people, although they stay in Indonesia or other part of the country. It's at the end of the day, it's a global project. Right? If you look at the list of Python core developers, they're all over the places. They're not centralized or located in one place. The challenge is to prove to, let's say, a company, maybe Google, Facebook, Red Hat, or whatever it is, to convince them that you possess the skills to be able to contribute in an effective manner to the project. And I think that's the things that we want to learn, right? And like I said in my talk, if we just consume things, we won't reach that level of mastery. only by tinkering with stuff. Then at some point, yeah, people recognize you as one of the expert, and they want to pay you to work on the project.
Okay. And for the volunteer, I want to tell everyone that PyCon ID committee from 2017 until now is all volunteer. And the website you see, pycon.id, is open source too. You can see it in GitHub. You can contribute it. And I see several contributor is not from committee. And yeah, they just open the repository and push a PR. And yeah, that's very fun to have a talk with them. And if you want to start it, let's see about the PyCon 2021. We will have a website and you can contribute it. Yeah, that's the first baby step, I think.
And that's just to demonstrate the effectiveness of that, right? Some of the community wants to have a conference, then they don't need to start from scratch. They can just clone or fork the existing repo and start from there. That's the beauty of sharing.
Yeah, it's very nice. And it's asking about your past. You start from physics background and electrical background. How do you start and survive to learn in IT industry?
How do you start to survive and to learn? I think at some point, what is important is just the fundamentals. And if we compress the gist of knowledge worker at the end of the day is just the understanding of, for instance, math. Basically, if you're good with math, you can branch off to many different subjects way easier than if you're not very good with math. So I think since it's very hard to know physics without knowing math. That's a little bit of benefit that I get from being able to move a bit laterally and not just focus on one field. And sometimes things are just reinventing it for the sake of reinventing, right? For instance, right, if you're good with math and you're good with statistics, these days you're gonna be very, very good data scientists, right? Statisticians probably have almost similar requirement as data scientists, but data scientists looks much more fancier. But fundamentally, it's the same thing. You have to be very good with math and statistics. And the same thing with machine learning.
Okay, so the coding skill is important, but also important is the
fundamental
area expertise area you know about it. And maybe a follow-up question: why you move from physics and electrical to IT industry?
When I did my graduate research in Germany, I hang out a lot with German friends, and most of them are open source contributors. That's how it gave me the positive influence. Like I mentioned before, it's very important to pick your friends. If you have good friends, hopefully the positive influence that you get will make you a better person. And at that time, since I thought, oh yeah, this looks fun, they hang out with the community, improve their own skill, help each other. I found that's very fascinating, and therefore I start to get involved. And before I know, I realized that let me stay in the software world for a while.
Okay, so choose your close friend wisely.
Very important.
Okay, another question. I want to choose it. Okay, you say that we start to contribute, and I think you also start with contribute to other project first. And what is the most difficult thing in open source project for the first timer?
Time management usually is very challenging, and it could be in the form of a couple of things, but usually the most important thing is the guilty feeling, because you want to implement something, but you're constrained with time. Maybe because you have family, you have work, you have other things to do, and therefore you can only contribute a little bit, but you want to do more. And that guilty feeling is not so healthy. So the perspective that you need to have is that This is a volunteering work, so every single hours that you can volunteer is already meaningful. We shouldn't feel guilty because we couldn't volunteer a lot.
Okay. How about the consistency? Is also the problem?
It is very important, and I don't think we're known also for our high regard in disciplines. For instance, I'm guilty of that problem as well. You are very passionate about the project for the first 3 weeks, and after that, you just disappear. This is also not very good. It's better to contribute maybe an hour a week for 10 years than focus on one thing for 3 weeks and then disappear. That's not good. Consistency and continuity, and that's the most important things in the world. If you look at one of the probably most durable and most widely deployed software in the world, right? SQLite. SQLite has been in development for decades, and it's going to continue to develop in decades. That's also give a confidence to the user, right? Oh yeah, this software is going to be there forever, so let me use it. But if you're not consistent, somebody might not have a lot of confidence in using your software or your project because they think, Ariya is going to disappear in 2 weeks. Why should I care about this project? It's going to be abandoned. Right?
Okay, we have very limited time, and it's only. I think this is the last question. Please, you can answer it fast.
Mm-hmm.
It is asks about your daily life. Do you also code outside work? And if
yes,
you,
the answer
yeah, you get
yes.
saturated.
The answer is yes and no.
Okay.
The easiest way to think about this is like, is it? Do you have fun doing it? Is it your hobby? Right? If it's your hobby, if you have fun, sure, do that. If you don't think that you're having fun while doing that, don't feel guilty if you don't code outside work. There's no pressure.
Okay, so don't be pressured too. Okay, thank you very much, Mas Ariya. That's
Thank you
all
so
for
much.
our first keynote speaker. And don't forget, we have several speakers today, and we have 2 more keynote speaker for tomorrow. And please come back here. And that's all for me. Thank you for everyone. Thank you for Mas Ariya. And the stage I will give back to Melissa.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.